I was a junior at State University when this happened. It was the kind of massive campus where you could disappear for days and nobody would notice. My roommate Sarah had dragged me to some end-of-semester party at an off-campus house. I was not much of a party person, but finals had just ended and I figured I deserved to blow off some steam. The house was about 30 minutes from campus, way out in the rural area, where rent was cheap and neighbors were scarce. I had maybe 3 drinks total, which was a lot for me. I was always the designated driver type, the one who stayed sober while everyone else got wasted. But that night, I let my guard down. Sarah was supposed to be my ride back, but when I went looking for her around midnight, she was nowhere to be found. I searched the entire house. The basement was packed with people playing drinking games. The living room had a makeshift dance floor. I checked every bedroom, every bathroom, even the back porch. Sarah had simply vanished. I found her friend Jessica, who slurred that Sarah had left with some guy about an hour ago. My phone was dead. I'd forgotten to charge it before we left. I asked around for a charger, but nobody had one that worked with my phone. I was completely stranded with no way to call for help and no way to get back to campus. The party was winding down. People were either passed out or heading home. I stood outside the house, watching car after car pull away, hoping someone would offer me a ride. But I was too shy to ask, and nobody seemed to notice the girl standing alone by the mailbox. By 2 in the morning, the house was empty, except for a few people who had crashed inside. I was exhausted and slightly dizzy from the alcohol. I decided to walk toward what I thought was the main road, hoping to find a payphone or an open gas station. I walked for what felt like hours along a dark country road. There were no streetlights, just the occasional porch light from a distant farmhouse. My feet were killing me in the heels I had worn to the party. I was wearing a thin dress and the night air was getting cold. Eventually, I came to a small bridge over a creek. I was so tired that I sat down on the concrete barrier to rest. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of an engine approaching. It was getting light outside, probably around 5 in the morning. A pickup truck was slowing down as it approached the bridge. I stood up and waved, hoping the driver would stop. The truck pulled over and the window rolled down. The driver was a middle-aged man with a beard and a baseball cap. He looked harmless enough, like someone's dad or uncle. He asked if I was okay, and I explained that I was stranded and needed a ride back to campus. He told me to get in, which I did gratefully. I gave him the address of my dorm and settled into the passenger seat. He seemed nice at first, asking normal questions about what had happened and why I was out there alone. But as we drove, something felt wrong. We should have reached campus by now, but we were still on back roads I did not recognize. When I asked about it, he said he knew a shortcut. His voice had changed somehow, become quieter and more focused. I noticed he kept glancing at me while he drove. Not just quick looks, but long stares that made my skin crawl. I was starting to sober up, and my instincts were telling me something was very wrong. He started asking personal questions. Was I dating anyone? Did I live alone? What was my major? I gave vague answers, but he kept pressing for details. Then he asked if I wanted to see something cool, and without waiting for an answer, he turned off the main road onto a dirt path. I told him I just wanted to go back to campus, but he ignored me. We drove deeper into the woods until we reached a clearing with an old hunting cabin. He parked the truck and turned off the engine. He told me he had brought me here because he wanted to show me a special place. He said I seemed like a nice girl who would appreciate it. But the way he was looking at me made everything clear. I was not here to see any cabin. I tried to stay calm. I told him I needed to get back because people were expecting me. He laughed and said nobody was expecting me, that I was just a drunk girl who got herself lost. He reached over and put his hand on my arm. I pulled away and told him I wanted to leave. He said we would leave soon, but first, he wanted to talk. He started telling me about how lonely he got, how he had been watching me at the party earlier. That was when I realized he had not just found me by chance. He had been following me. When he reached for me again, I grabbed the door handle and bolted from the truck. I ran into the woods as fast as I could in my heels, branches scratching my arms and face. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the underbrush, calling my name. I had never told him my name. I ran until I could not hear him anymore, then found a thick cluster of trees to hide behind. I stayed there for what felt like hours, listening for any sound of him searching for me. Finally, I heard his truck start up and drive away. I waited until I was sure he was gone before I started walking. I had no idea which direction to go, but I kept moving until I found a paved road. A jogger found me there around noon, sitting on a guardrail, still in my party dress with my shoes in my hands. The jogger was a woman about my age who lived nearby. She called the police and stayed with me until they arrived. I gave them a description of the man in his truck, but I never heard if they found him. I never saw Sarah again that semester. She had apparently hooked up with someone at the party and assumed I had found my own way home. Our friendship never recovered from that night. I still think about that morning sometimes, about how easily I got into that truck with a stranger. I was vulnerable and desperate, and he knew exactly how to exploit that. I was lucky to escape, but I know that other people in similar situations might not be so fortunate. I never hitchhike anymore, and I always make sure my phone is charged before I go anywhere. Some lessons are too dangerous to learn twice. This happened during my sophomore year of college, and looking back, I should have trusted my instincts from the beginning. My roommate Sarah had convinced me to join her at a concert 2 towns over, promising we would catch the last bus back to campus. Even though I had an important exam the next morning, I let her talk me into going. The concert venue was an old warehouse on the outskirts of town, far from any main roads. Sarah insisted we take separate cars, because she planned to stay overnight with some friends she knew in the area. Against my better judgment, I agreed to drive myself. Even though my car had been making strange noises all week, the concert was incredible, and I lost track of time completely. When I finally made it back to the parking lot around midnight, I discovered what I'd been dreading. My car would not start. The engine turned over once, then nothing but silence. I tried calling Sarah, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I sat in the empty parking lot for nearly an hour, watching the last few concert-goers drive away. The security guards were locking up the venue, and soon I would be completely alone. My phone showed only 1 bar of signal, and every rideshare app displayed the same message: no drivers available in this area. The nearest bus station was 12 miles away, and the last bus had already departed hours ago. I considered calling my parents, but they lived 3 states away. My friends back on campus did not have cars, and I had barely enough money in my account for a taxi, even if I could find one willing to make the long trip. As the security lights shut off one by one, I realized I had limited options. I could either spend the night in my car in this deserted parking lot, or I could walk to the main highway and try to catch a ride. The temperature was dropping, and I was wearing only a thin jacket over my concert shirt. I decided to walk to the highway. The road from the venue was dark and winding, with no streetlights and thick trees on both sides. Every sound made me jump, from the rustling of leaves to the distant howl of what I hoped was just a dog. My phone flashlight barely cut through the darkness, and the battery was already down to 30%. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, I reached the main highway. There was more traffic here, but most vehicles were speeding past without even slowing down. I stood under the one working streetlight and held out my thumb, feeling foolish and increasingly desperate. Several trucks and cars passed me by. Some honked, but none stopped. I was starting to think about giving up and finding somewhere safe to wait until morning, when a dark sedan pulled over about 50 feet ahead of me. The brake lights glowed red in the darkness as I jogged toward the car. The driver was a woman in her 40s, with short brown hair and a friendly smile. She rolled down her window and asked where I was headed. When I told her the name of my college town, she nodded and said she was going right through there. I felt a wave of relief as I climbed into the passenger seat. The woman introduced herself as Linda and explained that she was driving home from visiting her sister. She seemed normal enough, asking about my major and making casual conversation about the concert. The car was clean and smelled like vanilla air freshener. I started to relax for the first time all evening. About 20 minutes into the drive, Linda took an exit I did not recognize. When I asked if this was a shortcut, she said yes, but something in her tone had changed. Her friendly demeanor seemed forced now, and she kept glancing at me in a way that made me uncomfortable. We were driving through a rural area with no houses or businesses visible. The road signs were unfamiliar, and I realized we were headed in the wrong direction entirely. When I pointed this out, Linda just smiled and said we needed to make a quick stop first. My stomach dropped as we turned onto a dirt road leading into dense woods. I asked Linda to please take me back to the highway, but she ignored me completely. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and I noticed for the first time that the door locks were engaged. Linda pulled into a clearing and turned off the engine. In the sudden silence, I could hear my heart pounding. She turned to face me with that same strange smile and told me that she had been watching me at the concert, that she knew I would need a ride. I reached for the door handle, but it would not budge. Linda laughed and said the child safety locks were on. She reached into her purse and pulled out what looked like a small knife. My mind raced as I tried to think of an escape plan. Just then, bright headlights flooded the clearing. Another car was approaching down the dirt road. Linda cursed and quickly shoved the knife back into her purse. A park ranger vehicle pulled up behind us, and an officer got out with a flashlight. The ranger knocked on Linda's window and asked if everything was okay. Linda tried to sound casual as she explained that we had gotten lost, but her voice was shaking. The ranger asked to see both of our identification and requested that we step out of the vehicle. As soon as Linda unlocked the doors, I jumped out and ran to the ranger. I explained the entire situation as quickly as I could. The ranger listened carefully, then asked Linda to wait by her car while he called for backup. It turned out that Linda had been reported missing from a psychiatric facility 3 counties away. She had taken the car from the facility's parking lot and had been driving around for 2 days. The ranger told me that I was very lucky someone had reported seeing suspicious activity in the area. The ranger gave me a ride back to campus, and I spent the rest of the night grateful to be safe in my dorm room. I never found out exactly what Linda had planned to do, and I never wanted to know. From that night forward, I made sure to always have a backup plan and never to put myself in such a vulnerable position again. I learned that sometimes the people who seem the most helpful can be the most dangerous, and that trusting strangers with your safety is a risk that is never worth taking. The fog was thick that Thursday night as I drove back from my evening class at the community college. I had been taking accounting courses twice a week, trying to get ahead in my career. The drive usually took about 30 minutes through the winding mountain roads that connected the campus to my small town. The visibility was terrible. My headlights could barely cut through the dense fog that seemed to swallow everything beyond 10 feet in front of my car. I was driving slower than usual, gripping the steering wheel tightly as I navigated the familiar curves. About halfway home, I spotted a figure on the side of the road. As I got closer, I could make out a man standing near the guardrail with his thumb out. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, and something about his posture seemed urgent. When my headlights hit him, he turned toward me and waved both arms above his head. I normally would never stop for a male hitchhiker, especially not alone at night, but something about the situation felt different. Maybe it was the terrible weather conditions or the fact that we were miles from the nearest town. I found myself slowing down and pulling over. The man jogged up to my passenger window. He was middle-aged, maybe in his 40s, with graying hair and a beard. When I rolled down the window, he leaned down and smiled at me. His teeth were perfectly straight and white, which struck me as odd for someone who looked like he had been walking along a mountain road in the fog. "Thank you so much for stopping," he said. His voice was calm and polite. "My car broke down about a mile back. Could you possibly give me a ride to town? I can pay you for gas." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the doors. "Sure, get in. Are you okay?" He climbed into the passenger seat and immediately buckled his seatbelt. "I am now, thanks to you. I was starting to think nobody would stop in this weather." As we drove, I noticed he smelled like cologne. Not like someone who had been stranded on the road. His clothes were damp, but not soaked through like I would have expected. He sat perfectly still with his hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead. "So what happened with your car?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Engine trouble," he replied without looking at me. "Just died on me out of nowhere." Something about his answer felt rehearsed, but I pushed the thought away. We drove in mostly silence for the next 10 minutes. Every now and then I would glance over at him, and each time he was sitting in exactly the same position, like a statue. When we reached the edge of town, I pulled into a gas station that was still open. "This work for you?" I asked. "Perfect," he said, but he made no move to get out of the car. Instead, he turned to look at me for the first time since getting in. "You know, I was wondering if I could ask you one more favor." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" "Could I use your phone to call my wife? Mine died and I need to let her know where I am." I hesitated for a moment, then handed him my phone. He dialed a number and held it to his ear, but I noticed he never actually spoke to anyone. After about 30 seconds, he handed it back to me. "Thank you again. You have been incredibly kind." He got out of the car and walked toward the gas station. I decided to fill up my tank while I was there. When I went inside to pay, I asked the clerk if he had seen the man I dropped off. The clerk looked confused. "I have been here all evening. Nobody has come in except you." I felt a chill run down my spine. I walked back outside and looked around the parking lot, but the man was nowhere to be seen. The fog had gotten even thicker, making it hard to see much of anything beyond the bright lights of the gas station. I drove the rest of the way home feeling uneasy. I lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by pine trees. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed that the motion sensor light above my garage had not turned on like it usually did. I grabbed my bag from the back seat and hurried to my front door. As I fumbled with my keys, I had the strangest feeling that someone was watching me from the trees. I quickly unlocked the door and went inside, making sure to lock it behind me. The house felt colder than usual. I checked the thermostat and saw that it was set to the same temperature as always. I made myself a cup of tea and tried to shake off the weird feeling that had been following me since I dropped off the hitchhiker. I decided to go to bed early. I was tired from the long day and the stressful drive through the fog. After brushing my teeth and changing into my pajamas, I climbed into bed and turned off the lights. I must have been asleep for a few hours when something woke me up. At first, I thought it was just my cat jumping on the bed, but then I remembered that my cat was staying at my sister's house while she was out of town. I lay still in the darkness, listening. There was definitely some kind of movement coming from the living room. Soft footsteps, like someone trying to walk quietly across my hardwood floors. My heart started pounding. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and turned on the flashlight app. Slowly, I got out of bed and crept toward my bedroom door, which I always left open a crack. I peered through the gap and could see a dark silhouette moving around my living room. The figure was tall and seemed to be examining things, picking up objects from my shelves and setting them back down. I wanted to call the police, but my phone had no signal. The nearest cell tower was miles away, and service in my house had always been spotty. I was completely on my own. The figure moved closer to my bedroom. In the dim light coming through my windows, I could see it was the hitchhiker I had picked up earlier. He was still wearing the same dark jacket, and he moved with the same careful, deliberate motions I had noticed in the car. I held my breath as he stopped right outside my bedroom door. For what felt like an eternity, he just stood there. Then, slowly, he pushed the door open wider and stepped into my room. I closed my eyes and tried to stay perfectly still, hoping he would think I was asleep. I could hear him moving around my room, opening drawers and going through my things. The smell of his cologne filled the air. After what felt like hours, the sounds stopped. I waited another few minutes before opening my eyes. The room was empty. I could hear the front door closing softly. I stayed in bed until sunrise, too terrified to move. When morning came, I searched my entire house. Nothing seemed to be missing, but I found muddy footprints on my living room floor, and the sliding door to my back patio was unlocked. I called the police and filed a report, but without any evidence of theft or damage, there was not much they could do. The officer suggested I install better locks and maybe get a security system. I never saw the hitchhiker again, but for weeks afterward I had trouble sleeping. Every sound outside made me jump. I eventually moved to an apartment closer to town, with better cell service and neighbors nearby. To this day, I still wonder if his car really broke down that night, or if he had been waiting in the fog for someone like me to come along. Someone who would be kind enough to stop and trusting enough to let a stranger know exactly where they lived.